Professor Pat Dolan will not be joining us this morning due to family emergency, but luckily we are a great network of people, so we are all friends, so luckily we found a volunteer who works with Professor Dolan very closely and will be able to deliver his keynote for him. Wow. So a warm welcome to Professor Mark Brennan from University of Pennsylvania, from USA, UNESCO chair as well, who will be talking on behalf of Professor Dolan, but they work together, they do this research together, so he knows what it's about. And after that, we will have Professor Martinius Conradi from South Africa, from the Free State, University of Free State. Yes, thank you. Okay, so I think we will start, so please take your seats so that we can have another break and enjoy our well-being. So the floor is yours, Mark. I'll hand you the microphone.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. And first of all, just to thank you to everyone here, but to Anna especially, who is just one of the most renowned UNESCO chairs we have, and we're honored to be part of the network with her. And you're just absolutely a jewel in the crown of the university here, so thank you for everything. And as Anna mentioned, I'll be talking and presenting on behalf of my good friend and colleague, Pat Dolan. So anything that's controversial, we can attribute to him. Anything that's, happy and good is attributed to me, and we'll take it from there. Okay. So one of the some of the things I'd like to mention here is just some research we've been doing probably for the last 10 years or so, and it focuses really on the intersection of youth, resilience, and community development, and also empathy. And through a lot of the crises and other things we've seen, whether it's been displaced youth through war or other settings, or natural disasters or COVID, one of the things we've continuously seen is that youth are often forgotten about there. We give a lot of attention to mothers and children. We give a lot of attention to others, but youth are often, it's suggested they can take care of their own efforts, but actually it's much more complicated than that. So today, just here, I'd like to just talk a bit about resilience, some of the work we've been doing around that, and how that can be protective factors for youth. We'll talk a little bit about social support here, which is still an area that Pat's been involved for the last probably 30 years. And then we'll talk about some of this new emerging work we've been doing the last 5 or 6 years on the importance of empathy and how that leads to a lot of coping and well-being factors for young people, but for also a kind of wider society. So just to start here, this idea of resilience, we use this a lot and it comes up in a lot of different settings, but to give you a feel for how we kind of look at it, really it's the ability for people to overcome adversity, to overcome challenges that they're faced with. And these can be at the individual level, in their own homes and schools. It can also be at a larger level where youth are displaced, or are refugees, or other things. But the ability to continue to positively function. And as we look around and as we've dealt with young people, we see this quite often, that there's almost no strict pattern about how it happens. And that's what a lot of our work is based on. The other piece with resiliency we focus on a lot is how are young people adapting? How do they make their way through significant traumas, where one youth can do it perfect and another person can't? What is the magic kind of formula there that pulls that together? So in terms of social support, and as I said, Pat has done most of his work, most of his career in this area, and we still do a lot of it as well. But the social supports we have, all of us, but especially young people, it's kind of the bread and butter of relationships is what we always kind of think of it as. There's a lot of research that we've done, but a lot of research from many other fields, from psychology to all sorts of areas, that social support is absolutely essential to our survival, to our ability to prosper, to flourish, to our well-being, to everything. And we often think about social support as just support we get. But actually, it's at the core of a lot of different things. And there's many different shapes that each has a different function. So I'll just mention a few here. And I know I don't want to go over time or anything else. But if any of this, we're happy to send articles. We're happy to talk. We're happy to provide Anna with anything that could be provided along the way. Some of the work we do with social support, I think it's really important to make a distinction between support and social networks. We often use these interchangeably. We have networks of people we work with. Young people have networks of people they hang out with. But social support is different from that. And one of the things that we've done a lot of work on is the sources and types of support. And very often we'll talk about sources that can be different groups of people that have very unique contributions. Parents. There's certain supports that parents give that are just amazing. But there's also, for all of us that can remember when we were teenagers and everything else, there's lots of things we can't talk to our parents about, but we can talk to our peers or others. We can talk to other adults in the community. There's other people that each provides just some access to insight and support from these slightly different areas. Another area that we talk about quite a bit is types of support. So there's emotional support, there's practical support, there's advice. Again, all those come from different people. And I think for us, all of us that work with youth, that focus on resiliency and all these things, we need to think about what that kind of magical recipe is with each individual youth. You know, where do they get the key messages from, the key insights from? Other things that we've been finding through the research, the more social supports we have, and the more diverse the social supports from all these different types of people, they prove to be very strong buffers against stress. The people that have the hardest time becoming resilient, the hardest time adapting to change and everything else are ones who have limited social supports. So very, very important. And this last one here that this keeps jumping out of the research and the practice evidence and everything else is just a perception by a young person that they have support. Even if it's not there, the perception that someone is actually looking out for them, is actually willing to give them some advice, that actually values their opinions or other things, just that perception is seen as a major predictor in terms of how resilient they are in times of crisis. I think in a lot of times they're very, very capable of looking after themselves, but it's that little push there of perception that helps. So the other thing we've been doing a lot of work on is this idea of empathy, and I'll come back to this in a minute. But really we see it as a critical part that's kind of at the intersection of support, social supports, and resilience. And what we see is that the more empathy people have, empathy education programs, other things like that, it actually kind of multiplies the effects of the supports you get, but also the ability for you to be resilient. And that's both at the individual level and at a more wider setting. And just in terms of this, and we'll keep coming back to this, this idea of well-being and how all this fits together. A big part of this is self-care, and that's the last discussion that we had. I was just really impressed about the idea of how important that is for us to have self-care and other things as well as teachers, as researchers, as practitioners. One of the things we look for is that, the idea of our well-being is really something that's internal to us. But our resilience is actually inside and outside, believe it or not. It's an internal factor that we can get through, but it's also heavily influenced by other pieces. And again, that's those different types of support I mentioned, but it's also the communities we find ourselves in, the communities that have structures that, maybe look after us. Maybe there's stronger ties within the place that, help provide all sorts of things we need. The other piece that we've seen that contribute quite a bit to well-being and resiliency is the idea, again, with empathy, but also the engagement that young people have outside of school and other things. Their civic engagement, their community involvement, and this can be with their clubs, their churches, it can go on and on and on. But it's an important contact for them with the wider society. And that contact there, we've been seeing, makes a big difference in terms of how they see the world. And I'll mention just a few of these here. So the other thing we tend to deal a lot with is this intersection, this distinction between coping and resilience. Resilience is something much different. It's doing better than you're expected to do in the face of things. You're rising above crisis, everything else. Coping is sort of facilitated by the programs we do as teachers, as educators, as others. Techniques and other things to deal with the stressors. So the individual of young people to become resilient, it's sort of the mixture of these two. And very often we, in practice, and I come from practice. I've been an academic for 20 years, but before that I was always in practice. Sometimes we don't get to that attention that we give to coping and other things. We assume that if there's a certain amount of support, everyone will do fine, and that's just not the reality of it. So focusing on how people can bounce back through resiliency and other things, there's a backdrop to it that is all these human factors as opposed to the programs. So let me just mention just a bit here about this work we're doing on empathy. And from the start here, I'd just like to be really clear that empathy and sympathy are two different things. We often use them interchangeably, but they're very, very different things. Empathy is the idea to relate to people. For us as teachers or others to just put ourselves in the shoes of young people. Sympathy is just feeling bad for them, and very often sympathy just makes us feel better that we actually reached out to someone who's going through something, but it's not actually, it's more for us. So we focus a lot on this idea of empathy. And a key part of it that we try to get to is the idea of young people having activated empathy. And basically it's this pro-social responding. But it's the idea that young people with empathy can act and facilitate change in their communities. They can look after extended families, siblings, friends. They could do it in different ways. And one of the things I think is really, in terms of resilience and responding, that I think is really interesting is what we see is that the more that youth are get active in their communities, that are giving active empathy, their mental well-being actually goes up. All the problems they are facing kind of get pushed to the side because they're helping someone else. And it gives them this little period of breathing to, think maybe their problems aren't as bad as someone else's. So it can be helpful in different ways there. Other things that this empathetic action does. And by the way, we've set up with UNESCO and with Anna an empathy education program that's, we hope to deliver globally. It's free, it's publicly accessible, and if anyone's interested, just tell us and we'll send you all the materials. But we've done an awful lot of research around this, everything from case studies to randomized controlled trials, all just that's all we've been doing the last 7 or 8 years. Some of the big findings we've been having from this and how it impacts young people's well-being. The more empathetic people are, it opens up new relationships. You start connecting with people that might be different from yourself, connects with settings where people are more diverse. What we start to see too is this reciprocity of support, that if I'm empathetic for you, it builds a bond with us, and you may return the favor later on when I'm having a hard time, or you might try to understand where I'm coming from. Self-esteem is massive, and this is both internal and external. So we see that young people have more self-esteem by having all of this, but also people perceive them within their communities as being agents of change or being supportive individuals that contribute to a wider well-being. Again, just like I mentioned, if we put ourselves in the shoes of others, very often we realize that our problems maybe aren't as bad as we think. They're certainly important, they're certainly there, but we may realize that other people are dealing with things much worse, and that can put some perspective on how we encounter these. And the other thing is just the idea of some of the stuff we see with people that have had more empathy training. They tend to be more civically active, more socially just. There's also a bunch of other things we can talk about. They do better in school. Educational retention and retainment goes up. So we've just been fascinated with this over the last decade. I'm doing okay with time, right?
Yes,
perfect. Just some of the core things we do with our programming, but also we found in terms of process for young people. First of all is understanding what empathy is. Very often when I say I'm researching and doing empathy, programming, people assume I'm giving out hugs and kisses and all sorts of very light, kind of things, which we all should be giving out hugs and kisses, but it's a different thing. So understanding what empathy is and how it connects to us at the individual and a broader level. And then practicing it. In the world today, unfortunately, maybe we're not used to practicing empathy. So the idea of learning how to practice it, how to continuously do it on a regular basis. Also overcoming all kinds of barriers, and we can talk more about that later. But there's culturally, socially, time, everything else, there's a lot of barriers that get in the way of us trying to understand each other. And we need to make more of an active effort there. And then the key thing we're really keen about is the idea of putting empathy into action. You know, we work with students, we work with young people, and the idea is that they don't just learn about this, they actually do something with it. There's action and programming and everything like on the ground to help people. So, a couple more things here, and then I can hand over to my colleague here. Part of this has been this focus on presence, and we're seeing a lot of research here that really shows that this is a key thing. The idea of us as individuals, us as teachers, but also young people for each other, the fact that they can be there for other people, this seems to have a very big ripple effect. It's not just the individual, it seems to start affecting schools at a broader level. Other parts of this, and the part of the idea of empathy is getting to know each other. You know, we live in a very fast-paced world, and I think young people live in an even faster-paced world. We're all on our devices. We're all, you know, looking at our phones, everything else. We don't have enough time to connect, and we have to make more active efforts that maybe in the past we didn't have, or didn't have to. Other ideas here, stressing the individual importance and dignity of young people, that they recognize it in each other. All this stuff here, we've other work that focuses on this in terms of problem-solving context and other things, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in that setting. We kind of see this as an essential skill that we hope to build within each other. That leads to the problem-solving later on, but it also can be done in that way, and that's what Andreas Barth there did a lot of work in that area. Okay, and a couple more things here with, just a couple more things that kind of relates to that. Some of the things we've shown, just even small efforts that we can encourage young people to do, but we can do them with young people, is to be open to their ideas, open to what they can tell us about the world. My colleague Jameson Malcolm and I will be giving a talk tomorrow about youth voice research, giving them a place where they can actually share their voice, and giving a setting where we can be open to listening to what they have to say. And if they can back up what they're saying with data, it's even stronger for policymakers and others. The idea of being attentive and connected to them. You know, many of us have been in school settings and practice settings where we probably didn't do that too much. Might have been attentive to a certain extent, but not as much as we should. And the other piece is here, this idea of connection. This is how strong we can be connected to the youth we work with, and they can be to each other, but based on how often we interact, how do we get together, how do we connect with each other in the school settings or others. And for us, as people that work with youth, the last couple ones are important here. For us and the youth, being willing to change our perspectives on each other. Once we get to know each other and have some empathy for each other, we see the world differently. You know, again, it doesn't mean we all have to hug each other and put aside everything else, but the fact is we can agree that there's much of a deeper story to each other than we know. And that connection there is really important, and our ability to change our perspectives of people. For us as practitioners, we've seen the availability of just providing time to young people has been a major correlate in their well-being. And this doesn't mean it has to be hours and hours and hours of time with them, but the fact that they could send a text or an email or stop in an office or something just for 5 minutes, it's that actual action of connecting like that that really seems to be important. And then being very patient with them and loyal. These are big things as well. So much more to talk there, but we can save that for later. So this last couple things there let's touch on. We're really seeing this cool kind of interaction between the extent to which young people can cope with empathy, the support they get from all these different types of people, and again, it's families, friends, siblings, other adults in the communities, teachers, coaches. It's this broad-based group of support, and each one provides something different. The next stage that we find is really important is having all of this connected to their local communities. Very often we treat young people as adults in waiting. We give them lots of these different skills, but God forbid we should actually include them in decision-making or other things before they turn 20 or whatever age our different societies decide. Building in their actions into the community early on gives them a sense of ownership. It gives them a sense of connectedness to the place and the people. It leads to sustainable outcomes in the longer term, and it just really kind of makes a really holistic process where they see a place for themselves and where they see a role for themselves in the future of the place, and all that contributes to their well-being at a broader level. So I'll just wrap it up with these couple things here from Pat. Key things here. What we've seen with empathy and with social supports, across the board they're important for all youth, but very, very important for youth that would fall into whatever categories we would describe as marginalized, whether they might be refugees or of minority groups or other things. We found that it's been particularly important there. And the way that's important, it affects their resilience, their academic performance, their pro-social behaviors. There's a whole series of things that these small efforts can make a massive impact. And the other thing is that we've seen that they really, all of us, but especially young people, need to practice empathy through their interactions with each other. We need to really kind of make an active effort to think about each other. What's the story that each of us has? Many of us are very public about our lives, but an awful lot of us are very private about our lives. And it's easy to make judgments and everything else and with that. As we get young people and others to engage in these activities, we see levels of well-being, mental health, all sorts of things just increase dramatically. So with that, I will be quiet and I'll hand over to my friend here.